And their quagmire in the Middle East was made far more serious by the bitter partisan divisions at Rome. Two great parties dominated Roman political life. The populares, the word literally means Democrats, and the optimates, they called themselves, the best men, but we might call them the family value party. That is how they saw themselves, the traditional values of Rome. The wealth of empire had created a global economy. And all over the Mediterranean world, all the areas were linked together in a great trade network, with Roman money as the central currency. And giant stock corporations had come into being as a product of this global economy. And these giant stock corporations were deeply entwined with the Roman government. You got to be a senator by spending lots of money on campaigns that led through the offices that would ultimately lead to an appointment as senator. You got to be a praetor, you got to be a consul by spending lots of money on the Roman people, entertainment. Now, you might call our debates that we have serious, but they're basically entertainment. But you instead in Rome put on gladiatorial combats, and it cost a lot. And by the time you had won that election, you were deeply indebted to those business interests that had brought you along. And the whole election process had been corrupted. In fact, votes were openly bought and sold. And the two parties had forgotten their patriotism. In the past, when they faced the great threat of Carthage, they had united. They might disagree, but they united. Now they undercut one another in their foreign policy. So a corrupt election process, deep interest of business with government, and a quagmire in the Middle East. And at that moment, a debt and mortgage crisis struck. Debt and mortgage crisis have been far too little studied in the ancient world. And Rome was in the throes of a debt crisis that stretched all the way from peasants trying to keep their farm right on up through the richest senators and businessmen. They were all in debt. And so great was the debt that many were crying for a complete cancellation of debts. Just boom. But you're a creditor. And you're saying, no, I want mine paid back and not in depreciated money. And it was at this moment that one of the seeming horde of corrupt politicians, Gaius Julius Caesar, intervened on the scene. Intervened in a moment of crisis when a large stock corporation wanted a bailout from the Roman government from a bad deal it had made. And at first, Caesar was just seen as a cheap politician who'd get that legislation through the Roman assembly. But he was a man of vision, and he was a patriot. And he had come to the firm decision that the only solution for Rome's crushing foreign and domestic problems was dictatorship. The dictatorship of the best man in the world, and he was not modest about it. He was a genius. He poured more cash into the Roman financial system by conquering Gaul, and in the meantime, just as memorandum sent back to Rome so his enemies couldn't slander his name, he wrote a classic, his commentaries on the war in Gaul. And by 49 BC, he was on his way to becoming dictator. And in the process, he solved the debt crisis in a way that satisfied both debtors and creditors. Refinanced the Roman economy, lowered taxes to the degree that you worked 2 days a year to pay your taxes. And for that, you got the most cost-efficient and best army in the world, superb network of roads and aqueducts, and the provinces were now reconciled. And he began the process of expanding Roman citizenship to turn this into a true commonwealth of nations. And his work was continued after his assassination by his son, the great Caesar Augustus. So the Romans traded their republican constitution. Oh, they kept a facade of it. Caesar Augustus was a very shrewd statesman, probably the shrewdest statesman who ever lived, and he knew the Romans wanted only the image of freedom, not the awesome responsibilities of it. So the facade was kept, but all real power was in his hands. The Romans traded their political freedom to remain a superpower. And they would have told you they got a good deal. The next 2 centuries, the 1st and 2nd centuries AD of the Empire of the Caesars, was an age of peace and prosperity unsurpassed in some areas of that world and to our own day. The Roman Empire of the 2nd century AD, the immense majesty, stretching all the way from the north of what we would call England, all the way out to Iraq, from the North Sea of Germany to the sands of the Sahara. If you were to take a trip through that today, you'd start off in the United Kingdom, cross into Belgium and Holland and down through Western Germany, on into Switzerland and Austria and Hungary and Romania, down through Serbia and Croatia and Albania, Macedonian Republic into Greece, Turkey, Syria, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and up into Spain. You took that journey today, you'd have to have known a dozen languages on your own, change your money a dozen times, have 24 visas, and there'd be some areas where you would be a little reluctant to go, don't you think? Yes or no? In those days, one language, the language of Rome, carried you anywhere in that vast empire. One currency, a gold currency of Rome, carried you anywhere in that empire. And there was one law, the law of Rome, to guarantee your individual rights. There's no better testimony to the individual freedom that was fostered by the Roman Empire. Yes, they'd given up political freedom, but they gained an individual freedom, a freedom to live their lives as they chose that they'd never had before. A freedom that also brought with it an absence of responsibility. You don't have to worry about voting anymore. There's no better testimony to it than the life of St. Paul, Book of Acts. Wonderful source of history. He travels all over that empire, causes all kinds of trouble. He's more of a troublemaker even than I am. He travels all over this empire, and time again he'd get into trouble and hauled up before an officer, causing a riot. And the officer says, I'm going to give you a good beating for making all this trouble. Paul says, you can't beat me. I sure can. No, you can't. I'm a Roman citizen. I have not been found guilty of any offense. The officer says, I don't believe you. Paul says, here are my papers right here. How'd you get to be a citizen? It took me a big bribe to get to be one, but don't tell anybody I tried to violate your rights. And then, when Paul says, I want to appeal to Caesar, tells the Roman governor that, then the governor says, to Caesar you must go. And he is given a guard, protective custody, and goes all the way to Rome where, with his freedom of speech, he then teaches and carries on his mission. It was an empire of law. It was an empire so well run, with a dedicated, cost-efficient bureaucracy, that even eccentric emperors like Nero or Caligula were nothing more than blips on the screen, good fodder for something like the National Enquirer. But they had very little impact upon the smooth working of this great empire. It was an empire of social opportunity, of social mobility. You could begin life as a slave, earn your freedom, and go on to be a multi-billionaire. It was an empire of cities and an affluent middle class. How many of you have been to Pompeii? Walk through those fine homes that were part of Pompeii. They are made by people who worked hard, paid very low taxes, because the emperors understood that if you kept your money, you then put it back into the economy.